guys, today we're going to be discussing how many crickets you can feed your crested gecko per week, as well as how old they need to be introduced to crickets. Now I will put out there real quick, crickets are not nutritious enough or protein filled enough for you to be feeding them as a nutritious diet. So you definitely do not want to feed only crickets to your crested geckos. You want to also offer a complete diet like Pangea or Rapashi. So you do not want to be feeding only insects. And I also will say real quick, because a lot of people don't know this for some reason, which it could be that they just haven't been told, or they just don't want to listen. But you do not want to be feeding hard exoskeleton type insects to your geckos. That means mealworms, locusts / grasshoppers, stuff like that. You do not want to be feeding to them because their stomachs, they aren't set up to digest that kind of stuff. So most of the time they actually will, when they go to pass the insect, have it in huge chunks instead of actually being digested but the certain stuff in their exoskeleton they cannot digest. So it just gets passed through their body still intact. So if you feed mealworms or grasshoppers, I definitely would suggest stopping and switching to dubia roaches or crickets. They're soft-bodied and they're a lot more nutritious. They're way easier on the crested gecko stomachs to digest. And they also, most of the time, if you do dubia roaches, for instance, they're going to have way more protein than crickets. But obviously, my babies and my adults really don't care for dubia roaches, so I feed them crickets as snacks. So with that said, we'll go ahead and move forward. So we'll do adult first, and I have the lids on the containers because they kept trying to escape. And with Blossom laying on the bed now, I really didn't want them to get out. So first we'll start off with Blaze. And she is a full-on adult. What would you consider an adult? Once they get 40 grams, I would consider them an adult. So with her, she gets fed every 3 days. And with that, she normally gets crickets offered on the feeding days. So with her, she gets fed twice a day, or she gets fed twice a week. And if they can have up to 4 large crickets per feeding, then they can have up to 8 crickets a week. And with large, those are the adult crickets. Now, I personally only feed 2 to 3 crickets per feeding because mine are not hungry enough after their meal to eat up to 4 adult crickets. Like, adult crickets are big. So, with her, more realistically, she probably gets about 4 to 6 crickets per week versus the maximum of 8. But you guys do not have to feed crickets only when you're feeding them their meal. If you want to give them throughout the week as snacks, you can do that. It's perfectly fine. So let's say on an off day when you're not feeding them their diet, then you could give them 1 or 2 crickets as a snack. Completely up to you. But with adults of 40 grams and up, and about 2.5 years plus, that's about the age that they hit that. Sometimes it can be sooner. With Snickers, she is only 1 year and 4 months, and she's already in her 30-gram range, so she might actually hit adult size at about, 1 year and 6 months or something like that, but she technically, physically, is not an adult until she hits about 2 to 2.5 years old. So, it kind of depends on the gecko. Normally, I didn't think she was going to grow so fast. But either 2.5 years old or 40 grams, they can start to be fed this diet of crickets, or snacks, I should say. The snack of crickets. So with subadults, we have here that you can do 4 mediums or 2 larges. And that doesn't, depend on age per se as it does like their actual size. So depending on how big the gecko is, that's kind of how you can go off of which one of these you're going to do. So if she was a little bit smaller, then I probably would do the mediums. But right now I'm just doing the larges because she's larger and she can handle them. And sometimes, if you don't want to do that many, perfectly fine. If you think, well, they might not be hungry enough today, I'm only going to do a few, perfectly fine. You obviously can make your own call on how many you're going to feed them. But she gets fed every 2 days, so she gets fed 3 times a week. And I will say real quick, I don't remember if I mentioned it, but Blaze gets fed 2 times a week. I think I mentioned that, but I can't remember. So anyway, she gets fed 3 times a week, so that means she could have up to either 6 adult crickets or she could have up to 12 medium crickets. Now, of course, with her, I just give her large, and normally she's hungry enough to eat 2 larges per feeding. But normally if I only have mediums, then I only will give her 2 to 3 because I don't want her to become fat. So the last 2 times she actually hasn't gotten any crickets for food, just because I've kind of been trying to get a break, because she started to attack my hand, not like aggressively, but because she thinks when my hand moves it's a cricket, and I don't want her to get into that habit of attacking my hand because she thinks it's food, so I've kind of given her a break from crickets. But once they reach a year old, you can start to go to this kind of schedule for feeding crickets. So at about a year old, they're going to weigh around, I want to say 22 to 26 grams. So that's kind of the weight range you want to look for. So at least you have age and weight range idea. Because obviously if they're smaller than that, I would try to stick to the mediums for sure and not go to larges until they're a little bit bigger. So with her, she's in her 30 gram range, like I said. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on here real quick. And we'll move to Indigo. So Indigo is 10 months old, so she's in this range of cricket feeding. But if you have babies from 3 months to 7 months old, then you can do 2 small crickets, because at that age range, they're going to be a little bit smaller body-wise. Once they get over 7 months old to a year, you can start doing this schedule. Either they hit a year old or they hit 18 grams. That's when I start to switch them to every 2 days instead of every other day. So, right now she's getting 2 medium crickets each time she gets fed. She also gets fed 3 times a week, just like Snickers, so she can get the same amount. She can get up to 6, as we're, of course, she's eating large. But she can get up to 6 medium crickets per week. Now, of course, if you have a small, or not small, if you have a baby between 3 to 7 months, which I suggest not introducing small crickets to them until they are at least 3 months old. So once they hit 3 months old, you can start to introduce crickets to them, and we'll discuss how to do that in a second. But once they hit 3 months old, I feel like a broken record, then you can start to give them 2 small crickets per feeding. At that age, they're going to be getting fed every other day, so they can get fed between 3 to 4 times a week. So you can kind of do the math there. It's going to be between 6 and 8 crickets per week. So I'll go ahead and open this up so you guys can actually see her, because she's like right here. I will go ahead and tell you guys how to introduce crickets to your Crested Geckos for the first time. Now, if you choose to introduce crickets to them before they're 3 months old, you choose to tackle the pinhead cricket thing. Congrats to you if you choose to do it. I cannot stand pinhead crickets. They're a pain in the butt. They escape super easy, and they die really easily. So I don't like wasting my money on pinheads. So that's why I normally don't suggest starting to introduce crickets to them until they're big enough for smalls. So anyway, when you're introducing them to crickets, you normally will want to either kill the cricket first, or you'll want to kill the cricket and pull its head off. It really depends on the feeding initiative that the Crested Gecko has. With Snickers, all it has to be is dead. The head doesn't have to be removed. She will literally just lunge at it and attack to kill. With Indigo, you kind of have to pull the head off, rub the juices on her mouth, and then she'll eat it. So with some Crested Geckos, you might have to do that. With some, you might just have to kill them. I personally kill each of my crickets before I feed them, because the bigger they get, the harder they bite. And if the cricket bites on your geckos a lot, it could harm them, and it also will deter them or discourage them from wanting to eat crickets because they think they're scary insects. So anyway, guys, I hope that this was educational for you. I hope it helped answer some questions. Thank you for watching, and have a good rest of your day.